Why do you downgrade acting as a profession over the years?
It is a business, no more than that. Those who pretend that it's an art, I think, are misguided.
He was the godfather of the silver screen, a two-time Oscar winner, a civil rights activist, and a man who carried more secrets than any Hollywood script could ever imagine.
I think that we couldn't survive a second if we weren't able to act. That acting is the survival mechanism. We act to save our lives, actually, every day.
But what if we told you Marlon Brando kept a private list of lovers that included not just some of Hollywood's most iconic women, but its biggest male stars, too? While the public perceived him as a charismatic star, Brando's personal life was one of intense intimacy. Some revelations will stun you. One, in particular, will challenge your perception of Hollywood's golden era. Why did he keep this list? And why is it only now being exposed? But before the headlines, the lovers, and the whispered rumors, there was a beginning. A version of Brando most people never really talk about. And once you see where it all started, a lot of things begin to make sense. The making of a Hollywood intimate symbol. Before Marlon Brando became the face of brooding charm and raw masculinity in Hollywood, he was just a confused, angry kid trying to survive a home that rarely felt safe. His early years weren't marked by red carpets or cameras, but by yelling behind closed doors, a father who never seemed impressed, and a mother who disappeared into her own world far too often. Brando didn't start life on a golden path. He stumbled into it, scarred but sharp, shaped more by pain than privilege. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1924, Brando came from a household that looked picture-perfect on the outside, but was quietly falling apart inside. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a tough, cold man who believed in discipline more than affection. He expected obedience, delivered harsh words often, and kept love just out of reach. Brando never got the sense that he was enough. That ache stayed with him. Then there was his mother, Dorothy, or Dodie as people called her. She had this dreamy, artistic energy. A former actress and lover of theater, she introduced young Marlon to the magic of performance. But her love for the stage competed with a serious drinking problem. Some days she was present, encouraging him to express himself and act freely. Other days, she wasn't even sober enough to stand. That inconsistency left Brando craving attention and approval. He wanted to be noticed, to feel like he mattered. You see, that's where the groundwork was laid. Not on a Hollywood set, but in a house where love was conditional and unpredictable. His need to be seen didn't come from vanity. It came from years of trying to prove something to a distant father, to a distracted mother, and maybe most of all, to himself. Brando's childhood was also marked by rebellion. He hated rules. He questioned authority. That wasn't just teenage angst, it was survival. In an attempt to instill discipline, Brando's father enrolled him at Shattuck Military Academy. However, the rigid structure of the institution clashed with Brando's nonconformist nature, leading to further conflicts and eventual expulsion. Getting kicked out of military school wasn't a shock. By then, he had already learned how to push back, how to wear toughness like armor. What people later saw as his bad boy charm was, in reality, a defense mechanism built in a home where vulnerability didn't stand a chance. So when Brando later stepped into the spotlight with those intense eyes and that casual confidence, it wasn't just acting. It was a lived experience. The swagger, the unpredictability, the emotional depth was all rooted in his early years. He wasn't pretending to be complicated. He was complicated. And that, right there, is what set him apart. That's what turned him into more than just a good-looking guy on screen. It's what made him unforgettable. But the question is, How does a troubled kid from a broken home end up on the path to becoming Hollywood's most unforgettable face? Well, it didn't happen all at once, and it sure wasn't planned. Brando's breakthrough, from rejection to reinvention. After leaving Shattuck Military Academy, Brando tried to do what many young men of his generation felt called to do: serve his country. World War II was raging, and the draft was in full swing. Brando showed up, ready to enlist in the U.S. Army. But during the physical exam, he was turned away. A football injury from his school days had messed up his knee, and just like that, his military journey ended before it even began. No uniform, no deployment, just a rejection letter and an uncertain future. But maybe that rejection was the spark he needed, right? Well, with the door to the Army slammed shut, Brando shifted to another thing. He picked up what little he had and took a chance on a different kind of dream. He left behind the Midwest and made his way to New York City. It wasn't fame he was chasing yet, it was purpose. At Shattuck, he had stumbled onto acting almost by accident, filling in during school plays, but something about acting stuck with him. For the first time, he felt like he had a voice, like he could be seen in a way he never had been before. Once in New York, Brando threw himself into acting full-time. He studied under Stella Adler at the Dramatic Workshop, one of the most respected acting teachers in the country. Adler's method was intense but honest. She didn't want actors pretending. They had to feel it. She taught Brando how to reach into his own life, his own pain, and bring that to the stage. This style of acting, rooted in the teachings of Stanislavski, was miles away from the polished performances Hollywood was used to at the time, and Brando got it. Instinctively. He didn't perform like anyone else. He mumbled. He paused. He twitched. He brought an unpredictable, real energy to the stage, and it rattled people. When he landed the role of Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway in 1947, the audience had never seen anything like it. His performance wasn't just powerful, it was magnetic. The rawness, the rage, and the vulnerability all came together in a way that felt like watching a real person unravel on stage. When the film version dropped in 1951 and Brando reprised the role, he wasn't just a star, he was a phenomenon. From there, the rise was fast. Too fast, maybe. Suddenly, Brando was everywhere. He had the looks, the talent, the mystery. Hollywood couldn't get enough of him. He starred in Viva Zapata and Julius Caesar, and then came On the Waterfront in 1954, a performance that won him his first Academy Award. By then, Brando wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol. A cultural shift. He'd taken the old, polished Hollywood leading man and flipped the script. But here's the thing. Brando didn't care much for the spotlight. Fame made him uncomfortable. He hated interviews. He disliked the way studios tried to control his image. Being labeled an intimate symbol felt shallow to him, even annoying. He didn't want to be reduced to a jawline or a bad boy image. Brando wanted substance, challenge, truth. But the industry didn't always work that way. And that's where his struggles began. He pushed back. He turned down roles that others would have fight for. He clashed with directors. He was difficult, yes, but it was because he never wanted to sell out. He once said that acting was lying for a living. That's what acting is. This statement, featured in the documentary Listen to Me, Marlon, talks about his complex relationship with his profession. The truth was, he cared deeply about the work, just not the fame that came with it. Still, the hits kept coming. Films like The Wild One and Guys and Dolls kept his name at the top. But by the late 1960s, his star began to dim. Critics called him washed up. His films weren't performing well. He was gaining weight, turning down big roles, and disappearing from the public eye. Then came The Godfather in 1972. At first, the studio didn't even want him. They thought he was too difficult, too much of a gamble. But Brando showed up, transformed himself into Don Vito Corleone, and once again reminded everyone why he mattered. He won another Oscar, but he refused it. Weird, right? Marlon Brando refused the Oscar for Best Actor in 1973. He won the award for his role as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, but chose not to attend the ceremony. Instead, he sent Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather to decline the award on his behalf. Brando's decision was a protest against Hollywood's portrayal of Native Americans and to draw attention to the events at Wounded Knee. Littlefeather's brief speech highlighted these issues, leading to a mix of boos and applause from the audience. This particular act remains one of the most notable moments in Oscar history. But that was Brando. Complicated, brilliant, stubborn. Always searching for something deeper, even if he couldn't quite name it. In the end, his journey through the acting world wasn't clean or smooth. It was jagged, but it was also revolutionary. He didn't only act, he changed acting. But behind the camera flashes and the unforgettable roles was a side of Brando that most people didn't really understand. A private world driven by desire, vulnerability, and emotional complexity. Let's take a closer look at the part of him that never made it into the scripts. Marlon Brando's intimate world. Marlon Brando wasn't just a star who lit up the screen. He was a man who lived on his own terms, especially when it came to love, intimacy, and everything in between. To him, intimacy wasn't just a physical experience. It was layered, emotional, and sometimes messy. He approached it with the same intensity he brought to his performances. No filter, no performance, just raw truth. Now, the thing about Brando is that he never tried to hide behind Hollywood's polished image of what a leading man was supposed to be. He once said, pretty bluntly, "Like a large number of men, I too have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed." Even if that was some headline-grabbing quote, Marlon was honest in a way that very few people, especially in his time, were brave enough to be. He followed it up by saying, "I have never paid much attention to what people think about me." That attitude pretty much summed up his entire approach to life. He didn't live to impress or to fit in. He lived to feel. And when it came to feeling something real, lovemaking played a big role in his life. Brando didn't view it as just a pastime or a thrill. To him, it was emotional fuel. Biographers and insiders have painted a picture of a man whose romantic life was full of intensity, unpredictability, and often contradiction. Dr. Simon Rogoff, one of Brando's biographers, described his connection to intimacy as addictive and compulsive. In his analysis, Rogoff noted that Brando's sexual behavior was driven by deep-seated emotional needs, often leading to the exploitation of others. He observed that the more vulnerable Brando felt, the more he engaged in such behaviors, suggesting a link between his emotional state and his actions. This perspective aligns with accounts from other biographers and individuals close to Brando. For instance, biographer Susan L. Mizrucci mentioned that Brando was addicted to lovemaking, highlighting his constant search for love and connection. These insights collectively paint a picture of a man whose intimate relationships were complex and often chaotic, influenced by his personal struggles and emotional vulnerabilities. But even that might not fully capture what was really going on. Brando didn't chase intimacy just for the sake of it. For him, it was often about silencing inner doubts or easing the emotional weight he carried. It was his way of reaching for something true in a world that often felt fake. He didn't limit his relationships to one gender either. Brando was open about having been with both men and women, and he never saw a reason to explain or apologize for it. For him, attraction was about energy, connection, and chemistry. His experiences didn't define him, but they were a part of the complex, fascinating puzzle that was Marlon Brando. Throughout his career, his relationships often bled into his work. What made Brando's approach to intimacy so unique wasn't just the variety of people he was with, it was the honesty with which he moved through it all. He didn't hide his flaws or play to the crowd. Even in his autobiography, Songs My Mother Taught Me, he opened up about some of these personal moments. He didn't go into every detail, but you could feel the emotional weight behind his stories. There was a quiet acknowledgement that his relationships, as complicated as they were, mattered deeply to him. Brando's views on intercourse and love were also a reflection of how he saw the world. He never bought into the idea of keeping up appearances just to stay in Hollywood's good graces. He wanted real experiences, even if they came with heartbreak. He believed in living fully and expressing himself freely, and that included his sexuality. And while his approach might seem wild or confusing to some, what it really shows is that he was always searching for connection, for peace, for someone who understood him without expecting him to be perfect. That search made his life both beautiful and tragic in different ways. Now that we've stepped inside Brando's world of raw emotion and restless desire, it's time to meet the women who didn't just pass through his life, they left a mark. Some left quietly, others not so much. The women Marlon Brando slept with, a seducer without limits. Marlon Brando's romantic life was as legendary as his acting career. His love life reads like a Hollywood script, one filled with bold romances, secret affairs, heartbreaks, and unforgettable women. Some relationships were beautiful disasters. Others were short-lived flames, but all of them revealed a man who loved deeply, freely, and without apology. Coming up at number 7 is a secret chapter that might surprise you. What really happened between the young writer-to-be and Hollywood's wildest star? 7. Jackie Collins. Before Jackie Collins became a best-selling author, she reportedly had a brief affair with Marlon Brando. At the time, Jackie was a teenager. She was only 15. And Brando was already a rising star in Hollywood. Their alleged relationship has been mentioned in various accounts, though details remain very scarce. Jackie later became known for her novels that often depicted the glamorous and scandalous lives of the rich and famous, perhaps drawing inspiration from her own experiences. Next on our list is a stormy start. Brandy's first marriage. What exactly happened behind closed doors? 6. Anna Kashfi. Anna Kashfi was Brando's first official wife and the start of many personal dramas to come. She was mysterious, exotic, or so everyone thought, and wrapped in controversy from the get-go. She claimed Indian heritage, but some digging later suggested otherwise. Their relationship was quite explosive. They tied the knot in 1957, had a son named Christian, and divorced just 2 years later. But those 2 years were packed with drama, courtroom fights, custody wars, you name it. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale, but it was Brando's life. Messy, passionate, and never boring. 5. Movita Castaneda. Brando's second trip down the aisle was with actress Movita Castaneda, who actually starred in Mutiny on the Bounty back in the 1930s, long before Brando would do his own version. They had 2 children together and seemed solid for a while. But there was a twist. Turns out Movita's previous marriage hadn't been properly dissolved when she married Brando. Shocking, yeah? Still, they stayed together for years, finally divorcing in 1968. She lived a long life, passing away in 2015 at the age of 98. Through it all, Movita remained one of the few women who could say she really knew Brando and lived to tell the tale. 4. Tarita Tiripia. This one feels like something out of a romance novel. Brando met Tarita while filming Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962. She was his stunning Polynesian co-star, and he fell hard. They got married, had 2 kids, and even lived in Tahiti for a while. Brando was so enchanted by the island and the culture, he bought an entire atoll and basically never looked back. Tarita was more than just a wife. She represented a turning point, a quieter life, far from the chaos of Hollywood. Their marriage ended in 1972, but Tahiti remained in Brando's heart forever. At number 3, we have someone who slipped under the radar but left a lasting mark on Brando's heart. 3. Jill Banner. Now here's a name most people don't know, but to Brando, Jill Banner was unforgettable. She was young, fiery, and full of life. An actress best known for cult horror flicks, she entered Brando's life in the 1970s and stayed until tragedy cut things short. Brando later said Jill was one of the true loves of his life. When she died in a car crash in 1982, at just 35, he was devastated. Unlike his usual whirlwind romances, this one seemed different, softer, more sincere. Banner was the kind of love you don't get twice, and Brando never really got over losing her. 2. Rita Moreno. If we're talking fire, we're talking Rita Moreno. Their relationship was legendary for all the right and wrong reasons. It was intense. It was messy. It was unforgettable. Rita once called Brando the lust of her life. They were on and off for years, and their love story came with every twist imaginable. Jealousy, infidelity, heartbreak, and very deep emotional ties. Brando even pushed Rita to get therapy, something she credits with saving her mental health. Despite the chaos, they really loved each other. They were like fire and gasoline, beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. We are down to top 1 of the women that Marlon Brando has had something to do with. Let's look at what might have been one of Hollywood's most tantalizing mysteries. 1. Marilyn Monroe. You knew this one was coming, right? Marlon Brando and Marilyn Monroe. 2 of the biggest stars in history, wrapped in mystery, seduction, and what-ifs. Their fling was never officially confirmed, but Brando said Monroe called him the night before she died. Marilyn Monroe, reaching out to Brando in her final hours. What does that tell you about their bond? Maybe they were lovers. Maybe they were kindred spirits. Maybe they were both broken in ways no one else could understand. Whatever the truth is, their connection still sends chills down spines and keeps Hollywood buzzing to this day. Brando's relationships were as complex and multifaceted as the characters he portrayed on screen. His affairs with these women reflect a life lived with passion, intensity, and a relentless pursuit of connection. And just when you think you've heard it all, there's a quieter chapter in Brando's life, one that rarely made the tabloids, but says more about the man than most ever realized. The men in Brando's life, a seducer without limits. To be honest, Marlon Brando's romantic life was as complex and multifaceted as his acting career. And while we've already talked about the women in his life, let's not pretend his list of male lovers wasn't just as jaw-dropping. Let's explore some of the notable men who were part of Brando's life. 4. James Dean, a relationship wrapped in mystery. When you put two legends like James Dean and Marlon Brando in the same story, things are bound to get interesting. Dean, the rebel with a camera-ready pout, was completely taken by Brando. And who wouldn't be? Brando was already a force in Hollywood, while Dean was still trying to find his place. Now, this is where it gets a bit wild. Some say Dean followed Brando around like a lost puppy, copying his style, chasing his approval, maybe even wanting more than just a friendship. Brando? He wasn't exactly soft about it. He once brushed Dean off, saying, "No, Dean was never a friend of mine." That was a bit weird, right? But despite that cold quote, their connection is still one of the most talked-about relationships in classic Hollywood. There was even a time when Brando claimed that Dean was sort of obsessed with him, saying, "Whatever I did, he did." Some insiders say their bond was complicated, part mentorship, part obsession, and possibly something more. The studios weren't thrilled either. Whether they were lovers, rivals, or just two tortured artists crossing paths at the wrong time, the Brando-Dean connection still has fans guessing. 3. Wally Cox, the best friend who might have been more. You probably wouldn't expect Marlon Brando's closest bond to be with a soft-spoken comedian named Wally Cox. But that's the beauty of Brando. He never did what anyone expected. Brando and Cox met when they were young and stayed tight for decades. They were opposites in almost every way. Cox was nerdy and mild-mannered, Brando was fiery and unpredictable. But they balanced each other out. Think yin and yang, but in vintage Hollywood. Brando loved Cox deeply. He once said if Wally had been a woman, he would have married him. After Cox passed away in 1973, Brando kept his ashes in his bedroom for years. That's not just friendship, that's a soul-level connection. Now, a lot of people have wondered if there was more going on behind the scenes. Was it romantic? Was it physical? Honestly, no one knows for sure. Brando never said, and Cox was a private guy. But maybe it doesn't matter. What they had went beyond labels. It was intimate, powerful, and real. In a world full of fake smiles and scripted friendships, theirs stood out as something rare. Whether or not they crossed the line from friends to something more, Wally Cox held a permanent place in Brando's heart. 2. James Baldwin, more than just friends, but not lovers. When Brando met James Baldwin, it wasn't just a meeting of minds, it was a meeting of purpose. Baldwin was one of the greatest writers of his time. Brando was one of the greatest actors. But beyond the fame, both men had something bigger in common: a deep passion for justice, truth, and shaking up the system. Their friendship wasn't built on Hollywood gossip or late-night parties. It was built on respect. They stood side by side in the civil rights movement, speaking out when it wasn't popular, showing up when others stayed silent. However, some have tried to twist their bond into something romantic. And sure, Baldwin was openly gay, and Brando was famously fluid in his attractions, but all signs point to something even more meaningful than romance: an emotional, intellectual connection that ran deeper than most people could ever understand. They talked about art, politics, pain, and purpose. They pushed each other to think harder and dig deeper. They showed the world that two men could be really close without needing to define it. In a way, Baldwin and Brando proved that love doesn't always fit into neat little categories. Sometimes, It's just about being seen and understood by someone who gets the fight you're in. 1. Richard Pryor, the truth that rocked Hollywood. Now, let's talk about the name that truly sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Richard Pryor. Yes, the sharp-tongued, no-filter comedy legend. And believe it or not, according to some very credible sources, Pryor and Brando were a thing. It all came out in 2018 when music legend Quincy Jones casually dropped a bombshell in an interview saying Brando had slept with Richard Pryor, along with a few other famous men. At first, people didn't know what to think. Then came the confirmation from Pryor's own widow, Jennifer Lee. She said Richard was open about his bisexuality and had even written about it in his diaries. And just like that, the world saw Brando and Pryor in a whole new light. Their fling, or do we say relationship, didn't last long, but it mattered. It pulled back the curtain on a side of Hollywood that had always existed but never been talked about. It showed that behind all the glitz and big-screen personas, these were real people living real lives. Messy, complicated, and sometimes way ahead of their time. Brando's connections with men were real, and some were complicated. And they were part of what made him Brando. He lived boldly, loved deeply, and never apologized for being who he was. And honestly, that was part of what made him unforgettable. However, as the spotlight faded, the world moved on. Time has a way of peeling back even the strongest masks. And in Brando's case, the final reveal was quietly devastating. Marlon Brando's final years. By the time Marlon Brando reached the twilight of his life, the spotlight he once dominated had dimmed. And that wasn't by accident. After decades of scandal, triumph, heartbreak, and fame, Brando chose a different path: solitude, reflection, a quiet life away from cameras, premieres, and the chaos of celebrity. But even in retreat, the ghosts of his past, the fame, the family, the pain, never fully let him go. Behind the fame, Brando was also a father to many. At least 11, in fact. Christian, Miko, Rebecca, Simon, Cheyenne, Maimiti, Ryatua, Petra, Nina, Miles, Timothy, each with their own story, each carrying a piece of Brando's legacy. But it wasn't all rosy. Far from it. Christian Brando made headlines for all the wrong reasons, convicted of manslaughter in 1990 after ending Cheyenne's boyfriend. A crime that stunned the world. And Cheyenne? She was Brando's beautiful, troubled daughter, haunted by tragedy, battling mental illness. She passed away in 1995 by ending it herself. She was just 25. These weren't just tabloid stories. These were the cracks in Brando's heart. The things no amount of Oscar gold could ever fix. As Brando aged, the wear and tear of his wild life caught up with him. He battled diabetes, liver cancer, pulmonary fibrosis, congestive heart failure. His once vibrant body was failing him. On July 1, 2004, Marlon Brando passed away at the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 8 years old, but even in death, he defied convention. His ashes were scattered not in some grand Hollywood cemetery, but in two places he loved most: Tahiti and Death Valley. One, a symbol of passion, the other, of stillness. Both deeply personal. Brando never claimed to be a role model. He didn't ask to be a symbol, but in his quiet way, he changed things. His honesty about his intimate life broke down walls long before it was safe to do so. He showed that masculinity wasn't one size fits all. That identity was layered, complicated, real. He never waved banners, but he lived with raw honesty, and that mattered. Marlon Brando didn't go out with a bang. There was no farewell tour, no final film, no grand speech. He left the way he lived, on his own terms. His story doesn't end with applause. It ends with silence, and somehow, that feels exactly right. Because Brando never played by the rules. Not in life, not in love, and not in goodbye. With a lifetime marked by both women and men, was Marlon Brando's legendary list of lovers a bold statement of freedom, or just a reflection of a restless soul searching for something no one could truly give? Let us know in the comments. Do well to like, share, and subscribe. For more content like this, click on the next video on your screen.